In the headlines, South Korea and Canada sign a free trade agreement promising deeper ties as strategic partners. The deal wraps up 9 years of negotiations and marks Canada's first FTA in Asia. President Park Geun-hye is set to make her debut at the United Nations, addressing the UN Climate Summit tonight on South Korea's efforts to find new economic growth engines in its fight against climate change. And the U.S. airstrikes begin targeting Islamic State strongholds in Syria, expanding America's involvement beyond Iraq.
Welcome to the program. You're watching Primetime News live from Seoul. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Chery. Thank you for joining us tonight. Let's begin with President Park Geun-hye's overseas diplomacy today. It was a historic Monday in Ottawa in terms of bilateral free trade ties between Korea and Canada as the two countries signed a free trade agreement.
And as our presidential office correspondent Choi You-sun reports, the two nations also did a little bit of bartering of their know-how in energy-related technologies.
9 years after launching trade negotiations, Korea and Canada signed their free trade agreement on Monday.
FTA 효과가 교역, 투자 분야를 넘어 기술 협력, 인적 교류, 민간 경제 협력 등 제반 분야로 파급이 돼서 양국의 경제 협력이 한 단계 도약할 수 있도록.
With the FTA signing, President Park Geun-hye and Prime Minister Stephen Harper elevated their relations to a strategic partnership, placing a greater emphasis on their political and economic cooperation and mutual trust. Seoul and Ottawa set global peace and co-prosperity as their shared goals. The two partnering nations sealed a number of other deals to increase cross-sharing of advanced technologies. For instance, Korea will offer up its know-how in IT-based new energy industries, such as the smart grid and energy storage systems, in return for Canada's shale gas and oil sands exploration and development technologies.
We pushed for a memorandum of understanding to expand from cooperation in our strong clean energy technology to that of Canada's oil technology.
President Park and Prime Minister Harper will also expand their working holiday program to encourage more people-to-people exchanges. The Korean president also secured Ottawa's support for her North Korea policies. President Park is now in New York to carry out multilateral diplomacy at the United Nations. At Tuesday's UN Climate Summit, she will speak about building a growth engine out of the global problem by converging IT with culture and other sectors in a creative economy. Choi You-sun, Arirang News, New York.
And staying in New York tonight, President Park Geun-hye met with the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on Monday evening in New York, along with World Bank President Jim Yong Kim. At a private banquet, President Park discussed various global issues with Secretary General Ban, including North Korea, assistance for world epidemics, and military action against ISIS militants in Syria and Iraq. President Park lauded Secretary General Ban's efforts to reform the United Nations, while Mr. Ban thanked President Park for delivering a speech at the UN Climate Summit.
And on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly on Tuesday, New York time, North Korea's human rights record will be in focus, but Pyongyang will have to find a spot outside the door of the high-level talks. Kim Min-ji has more.
A high-level meeting discussing North Korea's human rights violations will be held on Tuesday local time on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York. The meeting, which will be presided by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, will be attended by South Korea's Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se, as well as diplomats from the European Union and Japan. The dire human rights situation in Pyongyang has come under greater international attention this year following the release of a report by the UN Commission of Inquiry that accuses North Korea's leaders of widespread, systematic, and gross human rights violations. Kerry is expected to condemn North Korea's human rights abuses, focusing on its political prison camps, and he will also likely bring up the issue of the 3 Americans detained in the north. The meeting is aimed at garnering support for a UN resolution on the issue. Pyongyang is also asked to attend the meeting. The North Korean ambassador to the UN, Sean Lim, said the North was waiting for an answer.
We told the US that we will attend the talks. If the meeting is focused on North Korean issues, we should attend. We are waiting for an answer from Washington. If they really want to solve this issue through dialogue, we see no reason why they would turn us down.
However, the ambassador struck a more negative tone in regards to a potential meeting between the foreign ministers of the two Koreas on the sidelines of the UN gathering. He said talks should be held in Korea and not in a foreign country or international organization, as they are from the same country. North Korea has sent its foreign minister Lee Soo-young and vice foreign minister to New York. Lee will address the General Assembly later this week. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, South Korea has once again urged North Korea to come to talks rather than giving out one-way statements. This is in response to North Korea's condemnation of South Korean civic activists launching anti-Pyongyang leaflets across the border on Sunday. Pyongyang earlier called the act a challenge to their efforts for improving inter-Korean relations. An official at Seoul's Unification Ministry clarified South Korea's stance again, which is that all pending issues between the Koreas, including the flying of those leaflets, can be resolved through dialogue. North Korea's Supreme People's Assembly will meet later this week for the second time this year. The Legislative Assembly begins on Thursday, and attention will be on whether new reform measures will be introduced. The regime has been reportedly introducing new economic policies that give more incentives to the working class. Also being watched is whether North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will attend the assembly meeting. He has not been seen at official events for about 3 weeks now, fueling speculation about possible health problems.
Your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Chery from the heart of Seoul.
Begins now.
Primetime news, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
And as our Choi You-sun was talking about at the top of the hour, South Korean President Park Geun-hye is about to address the UN climate change. She is in New York after wrapping up her state visit to Canada.
Right, and she's one of the heads of state announcing national actions going forward at the plenary session of the summit. And the summit is taking place at the UN headquarters in New York, and we're going to take you there live right now.
So you're looking at some of the live picture of the UN headquarters. And he is believed to be the president of the Republic of Kiribati and Notaitong. He is the second speaker of this plenary session.
And President Park Geun-hye will follow Indonesian President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono. And she is expected to talk about South Korea's efforts to find new economic growth engines in the process of fighting climate change.
And she's also expected to promise Korea's role in this new climate negotiations, and also what Korea is planning to do in terms of helping developing countries in terms of fighting global warming. And we're going to listen to some parts of his speech taking place at UN
as part of
headquarters
the
in New York
concerted
right now.
effort to achieve these aims. Accordingly, this would lead to a reduction in the greenhouse gases and to preserve the balance of our environment. Ladies and gentlemen, arriving at an agreement that addresses the climate change crisis requires concerted efforts to reduce the gases that emerge from different economic activities and to cope with the negative impacts of this phenomenon according to the size and capacities of each. Therefore, we must the new legal framework that we are negotiating should not be a replacement for the conventional climate change agreement. We must address the financing and the technology transfer and capacity building, and we must also work to operationalize the fund for green economy. Reaching an agreement to address the adverse effects of climate change requires concerted efforts. Today, I would like to renew from this distinguished forum our commitment to work with all parties to reach a balanced agreement, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. شكرا جزيلا Said the President. Thank you very much. And I'd like to invite His Excellency Mr. Anot Tong, President of the Republic of Kiribati, Head of Government and Minister for Foreign Affairs. You have the floor. Thank you very much.
Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry about the voice, but I've been shouting for so long over climate change that I've lost my voice. I wish to begin by expressing my very deep appreciation, Mr. Secretary General, for providing us this opportunity once again to try and seek a path in our struggle to come to terms with the full implications of the challenges posed by climate change to all of humanity. But whilst the scale, the severity, and the urgency of the challenges will vary from country to country, from people to people, the reality remains that the only effective remedy, if any, will require collective global commitment and, above all, action. I believe that as a global community, we have achieved considerable progress on the climate change debate since our meeting at Copenhagen in 2009. Much has happened in our erratic and unusual global weather patterns, which together with the most recent fifth assessment report of the IPCC and other collaborating scientific reports clearly indicate that as sensible people, we need to start taking the right measures to prepare ourselves for what is to come. We have all made our individual contributions to the literature on the climate change debate in our eloquent speeches, which we have delivered here in New York and elsewhere over the years, and I'm sure we will do so over the next couple of days. Excellencies, the question now is, where do we go from here? In fact, during the SIDS conference in Samoa, and since, many have asked, mainly journalists, what is it that I expect to come out of this summit or Paris in 2015? My simple answer is always action. Action that would guarantee that the future of our people can be secured. Excellencies, I've just come back from an Arctic expedition, as you can probably conclude. And words could never fully explain the immensity of the system in the Arctic region, or the full implications of the melting of the massive sheets of ice in the Arctic region. One could not fail but to make the direct connection between the melting of such massive amounts of ice and the fate of our low-lying atoll islands on the equator, and indeed, all coastal cities. The visit also brought home to me the global nature of the processes involved in climate change and the impossibility of ever reversing it once it has gone so far. Excellencies, against the foregoing and the background of past statements, which I shall not repeat here, I believe that there is need for genuine commitment and sacrifice if the challenge of climate change is to be addressed. In this vein, we as an ocean state have made a small contribution towards the preservation of one of the greatest natural endowments, the Pacific Ocean. The establishment of Phoenix Islands Protected Area, the second largest marine protected area in the world, which complements the Pacific Oceanscape, an initiative which encompasses other small island nations' marine protected areas. And the Pacific Oceanscape is our Pacific contribution, and with it, a statement to the global community that sacrifices can indeed be made. Excellencies, earlier this year, my country, together with fellow low-lying atoll island states like Tuvalu, the Marshall Islands, the Maldives, Tokelau, established a coalition of atoll nations on climate change, KCEE. The KCEE was not only a partnership between climate change frontline states, but it also forged partnership with other more developed allies. A partnership underscoring the concerns we jointly share over the slow pace of global action to address the increasing urgency and severity of the challenges we are already facing from climate change. A deep concern that for all of us, time is running out. I have no doubt that we all agree that climate change poses a danger to all of us in varying degrees. The science forthcoming from the IPCC and elsewhere, together with our individual experiences in our own countries, provide ample evidence that something is terribly wrong. Yet we continue to procrastinate. We continue to ignore what the science is telling us, and indeed what we are witnessing with our own eyes. We know that in order for us to make meaningful progress in addressing the challenge of climate change, there is a need for strong and decisive global leadership. So we must get away from the wait and see who is doing what style of leadership before deciding to do what needs to be done. For the sake of our children and their children, let us do the right thing soon. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your statement. For those who are skeptics about climate change, I would strongly recommend to visit Kiribati Island, where President Tong and his people lives. I was there a few years ago. You will never forget how serious the climate change impact is to small island developing states. Thank you very much again. With this, I'd like to invite His Excellency Mr. Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, President of the Republic of Indonesia. You have the floor, Mr. President.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to share with you my thoughts on two key elements of Indonesia's policy on climate change: multilateral cooperations and set of actions at the national level. On multilateral cooperation, I believe that we need to redouble our efforts to conclude a new legally binding agreement for post-2020 climate change framework. I must underline here that the agreement should uphold the principle of equity, covering mitigations, adaptation, and framework for implementation. We must exert our utmost effort to produce a new climate change agreement in Paris next year. On its part, Indonesia has taken a number of strategic measures to address the challenge of climate change. These include, first, Indonesia has voluntarily pledged to reduce its greenhouse gas emission by 26% by 2020. The target will go up to 41% with international support. To better achieve this pledge, we have put in place moratorium for new licenses on primary forests and peatlands since May 2011. Second, Indonesia is resolutely battling deforestation and land degradation. For this purpose, I have, among others, established the Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Degradation RED Plus Management Agency, which is tasked with improving forest governance. I am pleased to mention that with close cooperation with the government of Norway, we can deliver both the emission reduction and increased welfare for the local people in our forests and peatlands areas. Third, we are now exploring the potential of our blue carbon ecosystem as a carbon sink. This could support the global effort to maintain the temperature increase below 2 degrees Celsius. And fourth, Indonesia has signed the letter of acceptance of the Doha Amendment to the Kyoto Protocol. Excellencies, finally, Indonesia also stands ready to strengthen cooperation with our partners at bilateral and regional level partnerships is a must. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your example of keeping much before the time. Thank you very much. With this, I'd like to invite Her Excellency President Park Geun-hye of the Republic of Korea. You have the floor, Madam President.
Mr. Secretary General, fellow leaders, the climate crisis is real. The Earth is warming. Scorching heat waves, severe rains, and frigid colds, such extreme weather events are affecting human life in so many ways. As Secretary General Pan stated, climate change is the great challenge of the 21st century, and we must rise to the challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, escaping poverty was once our top priority. But even then, Korea made sure the miracle on the Han River didn't come at the cost of our environment. Our annual Arbor Day and Forestry Day campaigns completely reforested our once barren landscape. These efforts continue to this day. Driven by a new paradigm, Korea is seeking a creative economy, nurturing new energy industries to deal with climate change is a key part of this initiative. Energy storage systems that supply electricity around the clock, smart grid technologies that let plug-ins feed the power back into the grid. These are key examples. Carbon capture and storage and zero energy buildings are spurring new industries. Eco-friendly towns are being set up that produce solar power and biogas from cattle and food waste. Next year, we will become the first Asian country to implement a nationwide emissions trading scheme. We will also let frugal consumers sell saved electricity back to the grid. So we are doing our best to enlist everyone in reducing our carbon footprint. Ladies and gentlemen, tackling climate change needs to proceed on several fronts. First, we need to see climate action not as a burden, but as an opportunity. The tiniest change in how we think can later make a world of difference. How we view the climate agenda as boon or bane will bring huge differences. Investing in the chance to unlock new energy industries and jobs can ignite fresh engines of future growth. It has been said that the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. Second, technology and market-based solutions should be at the center. Innovations can't come from government alone. To encourage the private sector to lead, markets should reward carbon-cutting innovations. Third, all countries need to be on board. For developing countries, however, cutting CO2 can be a burden. To help them invest in needed capabilities and build markets, the developed world should transfer technology and know-how. Distinguished guests, All countries need to do their share if we are to limit global warming to 2 degrees by this century's end. Korea will work to submit next year our plan to support the post-2020 climate regime. We will also work with bodies like the Grid Climate Fund and the GGGI to share and spread our experience. The early capitalization of the GCF is vital to the launch of a new climate regime next year. So we look to your contributions to the fund. The Korean government pledges up to $100 million to the GCF, including the $50 million we are currently paying. Distinguished leaders, the human race has but one Earth. We must save our planet from warming. And the time to act is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President.
All right, that was South Korean President Park Geun-hye addressing the UN Climate Summit at the UN headquarters in New York. She went straight to the point with her first line there. The climate crisis, as she called it, is real.
Right, and it seems like she really wanted to rally other world leaders to see that responding to climate change could be a real opportunity and a chance for economic growth in new sectors. And of course, did you catch her catchy metaphor?
Yes, are you thinking what I'm thinking? The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. I really like that. I wrote it down, actually. She always seems to have a smart one. But it was very clear, though, that she means it when she says we, should get market-based solutions and funding institutions quickly on board with this mission.
Right, and of course, her last line says it all: the time to act is now. And we'll have more for you tomorrow as President Park addresses the UN General Assembly. Well, moving on to other news back here in the nation, Apple's first weekend sales numbers for the new iPhone 6 and 6 Plus are out, and they have topped last year's record set by its own 5C and 5S models.
And analysts are saying that Apple will actually have even more to celebrate once their new gadgets, iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, are out to the Chinese market. Our Kim has more.
Apple enthusiasts cheer delight as they rush into an Apple store in New York to be the first to get their hands on the newly launched iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus. One Apple fan holds up his prized new iPhone after camping out since early in the morning.
Big hands need a big phone. That's it, No, actually, the better camera, longer battery life.
I'm most excited about the Apple Pay, be able to pay without having to take out my wallet.
Apple says it has smashed its sales record for an opening weekend of a new iPhone model, delivering 10 million iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus in the first 3 days of sale. This tally beats the previous record set last year when Apple sold 9 million iPhone 5C and 5S. The record streak is expected to take another huge leap forward when the new iPhones hit the Chinese market, Apple's most lucrative market. The U.S. tech giant's new handsets are reportedly being sold at up to 3 times the retail price in Beijing's black markets. The battle between Apple and Samsung will reach boiling point next week when the Korean firm rolls out its Galaxy Note 4 in Korea and the U.S. Meanwhile, local brokerage firms are slashing Samsung Electronics' third-quarter profit earnings, citing the firm's slowing smartphone business. Samsung Securities says it expects Samsung Electronics to post a third-quarter operating profit of $4.5 billion, down $1 billion from a projection made early this month. Kim, Arirang News.
Japan has been embracing its weakened currency with open arms, but concerns are being raised about the effect it could have on Korean exporters, with the Korean won trading near at its strongest level in 6 years against the Japanese yen. Our Hwang Jae has the details.
The weakening Japanese yen has emerged as a real threat to Korean automakers. Look at the second quarter performance of Korea's #1 auto group and compare it to that of their Japanese rivals. Experts agree that the country's auto industry remains vulnerable to exchange rate change.
I think the global consumer perception is that Japanese cars generally have a better quality. And the Hyundai has price competitiveness. So in this case, because Hyundai does not have the consumers' confidence, that they are going to be very much affected by changes in prices due to the exchange rates.
For the past 3 years, the Korean won strengthened by over 35% against the Japanese currency and is now trading near its strongest level in 6 years. This depreciation in the yen has been gaining traction on the back of the strong dollar trend, following forecasts of a potential rate hike by the Federal Reserve over the next few years. And when the pace of the yen weakening against the greenback has been faster than that of the Korean won, it's put an even stronger upward pressure on the local currency. Korean policymakers are also becoming increasingly concerned that the weak yen trend could hurt local exporters.
If Japanese companies start lowering costs based on the improved profitability they get from the weak yen trend, it will have a major negative impact on Korea's exports.
Now for investors, Korea's next rate-setting session set for mid-October is something to keep an eye on to see whether the weak yen trend will stick out as a major factor when policymakers consider lowering the key interest rate. 황지혜, Arirang News.
The gender gap in Korean workplaces is certainly narrowing these days. New data shows that women in their 20s and 30s are more active economically these days. Our Shin Se-min with more.
There's one group in which Korean women are more active in their labor force than their male counterparts, that being those in their 20s. Nearly 65% of women in their 20s were engaged in the labor force by either having a job or actively seeking employment in the second quarter of this year. That's about 3 percentage points higher than the so-called labor participation rate for men in the age group. Many women in their 30s drop out of workforce after they get married, but nearly 59% of them stayed in the labor market in the second quarter. It is the highest rate since 2000 when the data was first collected. That said, there is much work to be done. According to a recent report by Korea's National Assembly Research Service, Korea's income gender gap is the widest in the developed world. Statistics compiled by the OECD show that it was 39% in 2010 in terms of full-time employee wages. The government has been seeking measures to level the playing field, with a recent report from the Korean Women's Development Institute saying the lag in the economic participation rate of women had created roughly $192 billion in social costs over the past 13 years. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
If the government budget could talk, it would say that cultural enrichment deserves a big boost next year, with the Park administration emphasizing a creative economy, and with the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics coming up, more money will flow to the creative sector. Our Park Ji-won has the details.
The Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism unveiled its budget plans for 2015 Tuesday. The final number will come in at more than $4.5 billion. And while that's just 1.3% of the government's overall spending of $360 billion next year, it represents a more than a 10% increase from this year and the biggest boost among all ministries. The tourism, sports and arts and culture sectors will make up slightly more than a quarter of the total culture budget each, followed by the contents industry at around 12%. By subsector, the sports and contents industry will see the largest rate of growth. That's partly due to preparations for the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in 2018. The contents industry, which includes film, music, games, and animations, will see more than 18% increase to nearly $590 million next year, as the incumbent administration sees it as a growth engine for the creative economy. The Park administration has vowed to increase the annual cultural budget to an OECD average level of about 2% of total government spending by 2017. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
The United States and several Arab countries have begun launching airstrikes on Islamic State targets, this time in Syria.
For more, we turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, these attacks have opened a new front in the battle against the extremist group, and now we're hearing that some 50 al-Qaeda fighters were also killed in a separate strike.
That's right. It marks further escalation in the U.S.-led campaign to counter what Washington has called a global terror threat. Meanwhile, both the Syrian government and rebel opposition have welcomed the international effort to combat IS militants in the war-torn region. This as President Obama is set to give his first public remarks on the U.S. airstrikes within hours. Our Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The United States and its allies have started airstrikes in Syria, in line with U.S. President Barack Obama's pledge to degrade and destroy the militant group that calls itself the Islamic State. The airstrikes early Tuesday morning in Syria targeted a number of areas, including in and around the Syrian province of Raqqa, which is an IS stronghold. Pentagon Press Secretary Rear Admiral John Kirby said fighter and bomber jets were used in the initial onslaught to clear 20 IS targets. These include buildings that are believed to be used as command and control headquarters for the militant group, as well as training and resupply centers. A number of Arab nations participated in the strikes, including Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Qatar, and Bahrain. Around two-thirds of the Islamic State militant groups, an estimated 30,000 fighters, are based in Syria, while the rest are scattered throughout large parts of northern Iraq. Over recent months, they have claimed wide swaths of land throughout the area, leaving a bloody trail of destruction in their wake. For the last several weeks, the U.S. has conducted surveillance flights over the region. According to the U.S. Central Command, the United States has launched 190 airstrikes in Iraq since August. These represent the first in Syria. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
And turning back to Asia, a court in China has sentenced Ilma Tohti, one of the country's leading scholars, to life in prison for crimes against the state. Tohti had been a prominent advocate for the rights of the Muslim Uyghur people in the western region of Xinjiang. The court ruled that the economics professor in Beijing used his position to incite ethnic violence. However, Tohti's defense lawyer said his client was the latest victim of the government's crackdown on dissent.
As his defense lawyer, I think this is totally unacceptable. He also said he is innocent. He will definitely appeal. Based on the wording of the verdict, I think that this is extremely politicized.
Amnesty International has called the verdict deplorable, while the U.S., EU, and the United Nations have also called for Tohti's immediate release. In response, Beijing's foreign ministry said that the case was handled according to the rule of law and that it opposes any foreign interference in the country's judicial integrity. And in the U.S., prosecutors say a man who tried to break into the White House last week had more than 800 rounds of ammunition and other weapons stored in his car. Omar Gonzalez was arrested Friday night by officers after breaching the White House grounds. Authorities found he was carrying a knife and had gotten through by scaling a fence, raising questions about the Secret Service's security procedures. However, following the incident, President Barack Obama expressed his confidence in the agency.
Secret Service does a great job. I'm grateful for the sacrifices they make on my behalf and my family's behalf.
The decorated Iraq war veteran faces charges of illegally entering a restricted building while carrying a deadly weapon, which carries a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. Gonzalez was previously arrested this past July by police while carrying a sniper rifle and a map marking the presidential office. And finally, the iconic festival Oktoberfest has kicked off in Germany, which is dubbed the largest, rowdiest, and most famous beer affair in the world. The 181st Oktoberfest officially opened on Saturday in the city of Munich, with Mayor Dieter Reiter tapping the first beer keg. Organizers say of the 6 million visitors expected to attend, almost 1/5 come from abroad to enjoy the annual festivities.
The atmosphere is what it's all about. The people having fun and going home in peace.
I'm coming from Slovenia and I'm first time here, and like you see, I went to the shop and I just buy these clothes just for today.
The festival is expected to bring in more than 1 billion euros to the local economy, with around 7 million liters of beer being consumed during the 2-week party, which will come to a close on October 5th. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to sports. This is Tuesday's Asian Games updates. And to start, not too long ago, the South Korean men's judo team beat Kazakhstan for the gold. And staying along the lines, but going to fencing, the women's saber and men's epee teams also capitalized on their golden opportunities. After settling for 2 silvers on Monday evening, South Korea rebounded to win both golds in their team bouts. The women started things off as Korea rallied from a 3-touch deficit against China and never looked back from there, winning the gold by a score of 45-41. The men faced off against Japan next and led all the way through to bring home Korea's second fencing gold of the night, 25-21. And moving on, South Korea showed off its horse training expertise in the men's intermediate individual dressage freestyle final of equestrian. Korea's master horse rider Hwang Young-sik and his trusty steed Furstenberg dazzled the judges for the gold medal days after taking the team gold on Saturday. Fellow national Kim Dong-sun got the silver. And now going to badminton, it was South Korea versus China yet again, this time in men's gold medal match. Unlike on Monday evening when the women lost to China, the Chinese women that is, it was the Koreans ahead first in this one. And after doubles with Lee Yong-dae and Yoo Yeon-sung, it was 2-0. Then in the third, Ilin Dan took down Lee Dong-gun in the third match to make it 2-1. Right now it's tied 1-1 in the fourth match. South Korea leads 2-1 overall. Meanwhile, Park Tae-won's slow start to his Asiad campaign continued on Tuesday evening in the Aquatic Center in Munich, bearing his name. The 24-year-old finished third in the 400-meter freestyle final behind China's Sun Yang and Japan's Kosuke Hagino. He was 5.1 seconds behind his Chinese rival. Park had to settle for his third bronze medal of the Games and has yet to win a gold so far this year. Meanwhile, new records were set in the women's weightlifting 64-kilo division with Chinese Taipei's Lin Soo-chi setting the bar. The Taiwanese star, she snatched 116 kilos, which was an all-time Asian Games best. And in the clean and jerk, she lifted 145 kilos for a total score of 261, both of which were good for the world records and the gold medal. Well, that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Che. I leave you with the medal standings and a look at Wednesday's events. Good night.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather updates.
At the moment, it is raining down in the southern part of the country. Now, this is an indirect effect of Typhoon Fengwang, which has downgraded to a low pressure trough over waters near Shanghai, China at around 6 p.m. It seems like the typhoon has left behind rain clouds here in Korea. On Wednesday, coastal areas are looking at more than 150 millimeters, while most regions could get up to 100. Be aware as downpours will be accompanied by strong winds, and overall Wednesday is shaping up to be wet and stormy. It won't be any different over in Incheon. Bear in mind that outdoor activities such as baseball is set to be in action tomorrow. Moving on to Wednesday's readings, Seoul hits 24 degrees, Gwangju and Busan 25. On to other places, Daejeon makes it to 23, Jeju to 27. That does it for me for now. I'll be back with more updates after midnight.
And that's primetime news for this Tuesday. I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for watching.
And I'm Kang Chery. We'll see you soon. Good night.